Madam President, I use the term loosely, but last Saturday, the 17th of March, was one of the high holy days in Chicago, St. Patrick's Day. And we color the Chicago River green. Everybody wears green, great parades, great celebrations. And I look forward to it each year, to go back to my parish, Old St. Pat's, for their Mass and celebration, and to have a wonderful day of a lot of good feelings. During the course of the St. Patrick's Day parade, I walked along the various groups that were going to march and came up on the Chicago Police Department's bagpipe and drum band. And I noticed that the banner that they were carrying for the day really was in honor of a wonderful man by the name of Captain Paul Bauer. Paul Bauer, police captain in the Chicago Police Force, was downtown in the Loop of Chicago on February the 13th. He was attending an important meeting, but he heard over his radio that a fugitive was trying to escape. He dropped what he was doing and joined in and participated in trying to catch this fugitive. He was cornered in a stairwell by this man and shot dead. The man who shot him got off 6 rounds and killed this wonderful man who had served not only the city of Chicago but our nation in his role with law enforcement. Left behind a young wife and beautiful teenage daughter. He's from the Bridgeport community of Chicago, and when his funeral was held, there were massive crowds that showed up, people paying a tribute to Paul Bauer. The reason I raised that question was that they traced the gun that was used to kill this brave policeman. It was a gun that was originally sold legally through a federal licensed dealer in Madison, Wisconsin, and then the person who purchased it sold it without a background check to a member of his gun club. We don't know if that person was disqualified under the law to own a handgun or not. But the next purchase we do know. It was the purchase that made a difference. That person decided to sell the gun on the internet with no background check and ended up selling it to a convicted felon, a person disqualified from owning a gun under the laws of this country. That's when that handgun got into the world of crime. It was used in the commission of a crime months before the shooting of Captain Bauer, and it was used to kill him on that day, February 13th. The reason I raise that is because we know what we need to do. We need universal background checks, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Whether you're selling to a person at a gun show or over the internet, there ought to be a background check. There's no excuse for selling a gun legally in the United States to someone who is prohibited by our laws from owning it. None. That's what happened. That's why that wonderful man, that brave policeman, lost his life. The reason I raise that is because we have a bill before us now. It's an omnibus appropriation bill, and it includes some provisions about gun safety. They're good. I don't argue with them. One is called Fix NICS, to try to make sure more information is put into the background check system. There's another one relating to gun violence, school violence, which provides grants to schools to make them safer and such. No objection whatsoever. But we're not getting to the heart of the issue here. The heart of the issue is we can have a Second Amendment giving rights to Americans to legally own guns and use them responsibly. And the Supreme Court has made it clear we can draw clear lines as to what is permissible in that gun ownership and usage. We can draw lines which say, yes, if you have been convicted of a felon, you cannot own a gun. You can't assert a Second Amendment right. You've disqualified yourself. We can say as well that if you are mentally unstable, you cannot legally own a gun in America. You can't assert Second Amendment rights in that circumstance. We can put provisions in the law relating to the type of gun that you own, how old you have to be to buy that gun, what kind of background check takes place. But none of that, none of it is included in this omnibus bill. My fear is this. My fear is that many members of Congress will say, well, we got a lot of contacts after the Parkland, Florida situation, met with a lot of people. Now we have taken care of our constitutional obligation with the provisions in this omnibus bill. It'll be a sad day if that's the case, because what we've done in this omnibus bill would not have stopped that killer from taking the life of Captain Paul Bauer. Not at all. So as far as I'm concerned, we've fallen far short of where we need to be when it comes to gun safety. Something's about to happen this Saturday, a week after our St. Patrick's Day parade. There are going to be marches and parades across the United States on March 24th. Tens of thousands of students and their supporters are going to march right here in Washington, in Chicago, where I will join them, and in cities and towns all across America, including Springfield, Illinois. They will march to urge lawmakers like me to finally pass meaningful gun reforms that help keep our children safe and our communities safe. Madam President, there are things that happen in our personal lives which we bring to our professional lives, and I'll just share one of them with you. After the terrible shooting that occurred in Florida, my daughter, who lives in Brooklyn, New York, was talking to her daughter, my little granddaughter, first grader. Her daughter, that first grader, said, "Mom, the teacher told us that if there's a shooter in our school, stay away from the windows and get down on the floor." First grade, warning about shooters coming into your classroom. Who would have dreamed that America has reached this point? And it has. Who would possibly argue the Second Amendment envisioned that possibility? That we'd arm teachers so we could have some sort of a shootout in a first grade classroom anywhere in this country. The marches that are going to take place on Saturday are a sign that perhaps America has reached a tipping point in gun safety. The fact that a majority of gun owners have stepped up and said we should have universal background checks is an indication that we're reaching that point. The younger generation is standing up, speaking out, and frankly confronting us. Those of us who are in positions of power and elected office, confronting us to do something and stop talking about it. These young people are tired of living in fear, as many students are across this country. They're fed up with the status quo where hundreds of Americans are getting shot every day while politicians sit on their hands in fear of the gun lobby and the National Rifle Association. I don't care what my scorecard is with the National Rifle Association. I know what it is, incidentally. It's a failing grade, which I wear with pride. I don't care about my scorecard there. I care about my scorecard with the people I represent in Illinois, and I particularly care about the parents who are worried about whether their school, for their kids, will be the next site of gun violence. These young people who are going to march on Saturday are fed up with lawmakers who ignore the majority of Americans, overwhelming majority of Americans, who want to close loopholes in the background check system. Through their powerful advocacy and eloquence, these juniors and seniors in high school are already bringing about change. Listen to what businesses across the country are doing. They're distancing themselves from the National Rifle Association. It's no longer considered just another political organization. They are voluntarily changing their business practices so they don't give a break to a gun lobby, which won't give a break to honest Americans who want to be safe in their homes and schools. The students from Parkland, Florida have helped these businesses recognize they need to be part of this effort. And we're seeing new gun safety reforms pass in state legislatures, not so much here in Washington, but in states like Florida that have a long tradition of voting the other way on gun issues. Unfortunately, the Republicans who control the House and the Senate and the White House still haven't gotten the message. What we've included in this omnibus bill is weak soup. 13 lives in Parkland, Florida are worth more than what we're putting in this bill. Even after Parkland, after all the lives that have been lost to violence, even as the school shootings continue, including a shooting at a Maryland high school this week, President Trump and the Republican majority in Congress are still unwilling to push for universal background checks and an end to high-capacity magazine clips and assault weapons. There were modest measures included in this omnibus bill. Is that all we get? Is that it? Is that the end of the national debate on gun safety for another 5, 6, or 8 years? There's important language I included in the defense portion of the bill, directing the Department of Defense to not only submit all its relevant records for NICS background checks, but also to flag and pre-validate the records which would prohibit a person from buying a gun. It's a step in the right direction. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient to really make a difference when it comes to gun safety. The pre-validation and flagging is important for the FBI to help us. It helps them quickly confirm whether a person should be blocked from a gun sale. But let's be honest, this omnibus bill that we're considering today and tomorrow doesn't address the fundamental challenges our nation faces when it comes to gun violence, it takes a pass. It's time for Congress to start considering legislation on gun violence that the gun lobby just might not like. We can't let the National Rifle Association have veto power over gun policy in this nation. Politicians need to recognize the obvious. The gun lobby is increasingly angry, sometimes paranoid, often isolated in its political positions. It no longer speaks for the majority of people who own guns responsibly in America. Remember, the gun lobby cares about one thing more than anything: selling firearms. It's all about the business side of the ledger, the bottom line profit margin. Violence prevention is not the focus of the gun lobby's agenda. In fact, the gun lobby usually opposes violence prevention legislation just in case it might hurt gun sales. It's reached the point where the NRA endorsement of a gun reform proposal is typically a sign that the proposal is not meaningful. We can't settle for the status quo anymore. We're facing a public health crisis of gun violence, and half-hearted measures are not enough. We need to fight for meaningful gun safety reforms. We need to call up measures like universal background checks and ending high-capacity magazine clips. Tell me why a person who owns a firearm, whether it's a handgun or a semi-automatic weapon, needs to have a high-capacity magazine clip so that they can fire 30 or 60 rounds at a time. Tell me why. You might need that if you're in the military. You just might need it when it comes to police work and keeping our communities safe. There could be circumstances where they're needed. But why would an individual citizen need the capacity to fire 30 or 60 rounds at one time? Those are the clips that are being used, incidentally, by these gun shooters. Those are the clips that are being used for mass killing in America. Those clips do one thing: they take human lives. It's not a question of sport or hunting or target practice. It's a question.
10 minutes.
I ask consent to speak for 3 additional minutes, if the senator from Utah would give me that opportunity.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Let me close by saying on March 24th, students and Americans of all ages will march in the streets to honor those who've been lost to senseless gun violence and to call on their elected representatives to step up. I support the marchers, and I'll continue to work for meaningful action to help reduce gun violence. I'm going to keep doing everything I can to put the safety of our kids and our neighborhoods ahead of the gun lobby's agenda. I don't have any obligation to the National Rifle Association whatsoever, but I do have an obligation to a granddaughter living in Brooklyn, New York, in the 1st grade, who's been warned about what to do if a shooter comes into her classroom. I hope my colleagues from across the aisle will join me. It's time to take a stand and show leadership. America is waiting.